Welcome back. This is John Locke, and I'm discussing an article that dropped on the Google Webmaster Central blog on August 1st entitled What Webmasters Should Know About Google's Core Updates. Now, this article was a big buzz in the SEO world the other day. And I think the reason why Google put this article out is because there's been a lot of confusion about why rankings go up or go down or they fluctuate when they do these broad core updates. Now, for a little bit of a backstory for people who uh, are new to SEO. In the past, when Google would do updates, they would generally be focused on one aspect of the algorithm, and they would usually have some kind of clever name like panda or penguin, puffin, hummingbird, all these different things. And they were usually focused on one aspect that they needed to clean up, whether that was low quality links, uh, taking all the power out of them, focusing on devaluing low value content, you know, spam, all these different sorts of things, private blog networks, article farms. All these things have been targeted in the past, but ever since about a year ago, with August 2018, the so-called Medic update, and then also in March 2019 and June 2019, they've seen more what they call broad core updates, where these things are not targeting one specific part of the algorithm, or they're not targeting one thing to devalue or push harder. They're, as it states, a broad core update to the algorithm, and they're basically trying to improve how they evaluate content and sites and all these different things. And these happen about 3 times a year, it seems so far. Um, a good way that they describe this, because a lot of people get upset. They think they're being penalized, they think they're being hurt, they think they're being singled out, and Google is punishing them for something that they did wrong. And that's not the case. And the analogy that they use here is thinking of a core update as the way you think about making a list of the top movies or the top albums. And if you made a list in 2015, and then a few years later in 2019, there's new movies, there's new creative works that could be added to that list. Maybe there's ones in the past that their legacy has grown over time. Maybe an album that was popular, or a movie that was seen as popular or groundbreaking. Maybe it's been uh, kind of devalued in the eyes of people over time. Maybe there's other ones their legacy has grown and their genius is shown through. But obviously, there's new movies coming out, so the list is going to change, and some things that used to be higher up might get pushed down by some of these newer things. And the ranking algorithm is like that too. And so if you were number one for something, or in the top 10 for something for a long time, and then you slowly slip down the ranks, or you notice that a lot of your stuff is not doing as good as it was, it's Google reevaluating based on the set of web pages that they have now. And it simply means that other people are working hard to create great content that is presented in a way that's great and build strong brands. And it doesn't mean that you did anything wrong. It just means that other people are also putting in the work, and they might move ahead of you because they're putting in the work. That's all. So I'm going to focus most of this video on this section where they break down, there's some bullet points here. And it starts in, they say, starting point is to revisit the advice we offered in the past. This is an article from 2015, how to self-assess if you're offering quality content. Now, the reason why I'm going to assess what they're saying here, sometimes Google says things and they're very straightforward. And they say, yes, this is something you should do, or no, this is something you should not do. But sometimes they have ambiguity built into it, and Google representatives in particular, sometimes they write things with ambiguity on purpose because they're not going to tell you 100% of what's in the algorithm. And even some Google engineers might not know 100% of what's in the algorithm day to day. But like I said, they make adjustments to this algorithm several times per day. So it is a black box with a moving target that you're aiming at. But there are things that they want to see happen, and they try and point you in the right direction without giving too much away. So let's get into it. Content and quality questions. Now, before I go any further, too, this is my own take on these, what they're saying here based on my own experience and what I've seen with client sites. This is not me just repeating what I heard somewhere else. This is my own interpretation of these based on my own experiences. So, does the content provide original information, reporting, and research or analysis? Uh, so I think part of what they're looking for here is they're looking for a fresh take or a fresh voice. They might be looking at the syntax and the words that are in the page. They might be um, checking to see if you are covering a different subtopic of this whatever you're talking about on this page, different from other people. If you are using a different words, or you're telling a different story as far as presenting the facts but telling them in a different way, then you might get rewarded for having original information. I think something that's important here is original research, original analysis. Now, this is something that cannot be duplicated very easily. You have to not just repeat what other people said, but bring something new to the table. You see this especially in marketing, where um, if people bring their own data to the article, it seems to do better in some cases. So, original information, original research, original analysis. Okay, does the content provide a substantial, complete, or comprehensive description of the topic? What I think that they're looking for here is, for one, they're looking for certain phrases, words that have performed well in the past, in the way that their machine learning understands this. Is there are certain words that appear when you're talking about a certain topic. The other thing that I believe that they're looking for with this is having more questions answered than your competitors. And we'll talk more about that, but they want to make sure that you are not just writing like 300 words on a topic, but it is, especially with an informational post, if it has to be comprehensive and cover all the bases that some of the other well-performing articles touch on. Now, like going back up here, if you add more to it, original reporting or information, that might do a little bit better, but you want to cover all the bases that the top ranking pages are covering. Okay, does the content provide insightful analysis or interesting information that is beyond obvious? This could be a lot of different things. This particular bullet point is written with a lot of ambiguity. So it could be the way that you analyze it. It could be anecdotes. It could be a story that you're telling. It could be the way that you're presenting the information. It could be original illustrations or images, but something in there that's providing something different than the other people out there. You're putting your own unique spin on it. Um, okay, next bullet point. If the content draws on other sources, does it avoid simply copying and rewriting those sources, or does it instead provide substantial additional value and originality? So what I think is going on there is they're checking for plagiarism. They're checking for copying and pasting. If you're just copying and pasting somebody else's words, then there's no real reason to rank you above things that are already doing well because it's not really doing anything original. If you are drawing on sources, how are you adding your own um, take on that? How are you adding to the data that's already been collected? What additional insights are you bringing? But definitely don't copy and paste. Um, write things from your own words. Okay, does the headline and or page title provide a descriptive, helpful summary of the content? What I believe that they're saying there is they want to see keywords both in the title tag and the H1 on the page. They're looking for specific keywords that are in the content. They're taking cues from the title tag and they're taking cues from the H1, comparing it to the rest of the content and saying, are you summarizing what this article is about? I really do believe that that is what this is saying. A descriptive, helpful summary of the content. This could also be related to the title tag, and are people clicking through on it because they're you're giving them what they need, and then maybe they have a deep scroll depth on that, but a helpful summary of the content. Does the content on the page and the title and the H1 all match up uh, equivalently? Okay. Does the title and or page title avoid being exaggerating or shocking in nature? So what I believe is happening here is they don't want to reward clickbait. They don't want to reward things that are, who's the father, or you won't believe what they look like now, or here's one weird trick to make you lose belly fat. I think they have a data bank of certain phrases and words that, when put together, equal clickbait, and we're not going to reward it because it's just meant to titillate or shock or cause controversy and get people to check it out just on shock value alone. And I think that they don't want to reward that because there's not a lot of depth to it. It's just a gimmick. Okay, is this the sort of page you'd want to bookmark, share with a friend, or recommend? Now, there is a theory, and it sounds very plausible, if you ask me, that's floated around SEO for a while, and that is that bookmarks in Chrome, the Chrome browser, might have an effect on SEO. Now, if you were Google 10 years ago and you wanted to collect data on how people engage with the page, and because remember, not every website has Google Analytics, only about 50% of the websites out there in the world have Google Analytics, but we still need to get information about how people engage with the page, how they interact with the page. How can we do that? If you're Google, you're probably thinking 10 years ago, let's build our own web browser called Google Chrome. And we can see what people do. So there is a theory that says that people who bookmark certain pages in Chrome, that might have a positive effect. I think it's a very plausible theory. I don't know that it would ever be a theory that you could prove, because you're talking about such a large scale thing that's happening there. I'm sure it might have a little bit of an effect. Who knows? But sharing with a friend, recommending, that's obviously talking about social media. That's talking about putting it in email, like putting it in Gmail, putting the URL in Gmail, and sharing it with a friend. Could be a YouTube link that you're sharing. Could be social buttons. Uh, that those are all definitely things that could have a positive effect. Okay, so would you expect to see this content referenced by a printed magazine, encyclopedia, or book? Now, obviously, Google doesn't have access to printed books. Well, they do have Google Books. They do have a thing where people scan in books. So they do have that, but it's not going to be current. Like if it was published like just this year or an encyclopedia, it might not be in there yet. Um, but referenced in a printed magazine, encyclopedia, or book. This seems to be a clue that they're looking for things. Let's say that it's an ebook. Let's say that it's a Kindle book. or something like that. Let's say that it's a free ebook that's publicly available. If there's links to certain pages or sites in those, that might be something that they consider a little bit more authoritative. Let's say Wikipedia. If you're referenced in Wikipedia as a footnote or a citation, that might be authoritative. A lot of people theorize that one. If your article, if your page is referenced in a thesis paper or a scientific study or some sort of doctorate paper, that might be a good sign. I think that that's really what this is. This is kind of a clue. It doesn't out and out say it, but if you really think about what they're trying to say, that makes a lot of sense. So let's look at this next section, which is expertise questions. I think this is the one that's the most controversial because with the EAT that's in the quality rater guidelines, the expertise, authority, and trustworthiness, a lot of people get tripped up on this one, I believe, because they think about it how a human would evaluate expertise, authority, and trustworthiness. Because I think a lot of people feel, I have all three. I have expertise and I'm an authority and people can trust me. So, I have EAT, so Google should rank me higher. The thing of it is, Google is the Google bot is it crawls around the web and it looks for, mentions of words and phrases, and it looks for links, and it looks for uh, getting meaning from words that are in and phrases that are in the pages that it encounters. So if it's not on the web, then it pretty much does not exist to Google. So I think you got to keep that in mind. Expertise as well. Google has a hard time, I think, evaluating the expertise or stack ranking all the experts in a particular subject for all the subjects in the entire world. I don't think it's quite there yet. I don't think that's an unfair statement to make. So I think a lot of people get tripped up on this one, but I'm going to give you my take. Okay, so this says, does the content present information in a way that makes you want to trust it, such as clear sourcing, evidence of the expertise involved, background about the author or the site that publishes it, such as links to an author page or a site's about page. Now, okay, you're presenting information in a way that makes you want to trust it. This could be a lot of things. It could be the formatting of the content. It could be the track record of the website itself, which I think is a lot of this, not necessarily web authors. And I'll tell you why in a second. But you have clear sourcing. You have footnotes, just like we talked about in the last thing. If you expect to see this content referenced by a printed magazine, encyclopedia, or book, or Wikipedia, or thesis documents, or in an ebook, or something like that, then it stands that if you're showing where you're getting your information from, if you're linking to where you're getting your study information from, then that might be good. If you're not just pulling facts out of thin air, but you're showing your sources like Wikipedia does, that might be a good thing. Okay, so evidence of the expertise involved. Now, one of the things that it's not just the content and it's not just who's writing it. I think the who's writing it is obvious to me. It's the least important part of it. I think part of it has to do with the expertise of the site. That is something that is discussed in EAT. Was the site made with a high degree of quality and skill? That's something that is talked about in the expertise section. But also, are you writing this in a way that shows that you have an understanding of the subject and you're writing it in a way that's well syntaxed and well put together? The expertise involved as far as authorship, it's another thing where if you've written a book or an ebook, or if you put something on Amazon, then Google has an entity graph for that author. It has you in a knowledge panel. But if you're just a regular Joe Blow or Jane Plain web author, then Google has no idea whether you have expertise in your given subject or not. It really doesn't in most cases. You have to have a really long track record for it to understand that your name is an entity in itself and then associate it with a given subject. It's a lot of work that you're um, putting on Google to do. We discussed this in a video we called the Google Paradox, where it talks about this, where Google is not omnipotent. Certain people it does understand, but the vast majority of people it does not. But if you have I think it's very clear it's saying that on your author pages you should show what they are known for, and you should have an about page at least to tell who's behind the website. Now, I've seen a lot of sites that don't make it super clear who's the author of the content, still ranks. Uh, so I would take this with a grain of salt. I would also point out that I've seen very recently, and especially with sites that are your money or your life, like health, finance, insurance, um, nutrition, things like that, that the author could be a PhD and they could have a lot of real world expertise, but for whatever reason, it doesn't seem to have a big effect on bringing the site up. And that's why I say a lot of people feel like they have expertise and authority, but um, maybe in Google's eyes, it's not proven. And I think that you have to remember that Google assesses this stuff the way a machine would and not how a human being would. It's looking for certain phrases, it's looking for certain things. Maybe if you're being linked to a lot, that might be something that helps. Okay, now here's a clue here. If you researched the site producing the content, would you come away with an impression that the site is well trusted or widely recognized as an authority on its topic? I'm going to say what I think this means. I think that this means if you're doing background research on this site, if you Google the name of the site, yourdomain.com, and you're seeing that there's not a lot of places that reference that website, then maybe it's not that much of an authority. Remember how we talked about just a minute ago? You would expect to see this content referenced in a book or encyclopedia, and we said maybe other websites or a ebook or Wikipedia. If you're actually an expert or an authority in your field, then what's going to happen is other websites are going to link to you. If other websites in your field are not linking to you, or if nobody's talking about your website or you or your content, then maybe you're not as big of an authority uh, as you think. Because remember, it's all about what Google sees. It's not about what's happening offline. It has to exist online. I'm going to also point out, as far as EAT, the expertise, authority, and trustworthiness, this is the only time in this article where the word authority is mentioned. This is the only time in this article where authority, the word, is mentioned. So widely recognized, other sites are linking to you and talking about you. Well trusted, other sites are linking to you. If they didn't trust you, they wouldn't link to you. I think that is all this is basically a pseudonym for you have links from other people in your industry. Okay, the next place we're going to talk about here is this content written by an expert or an enthusiast who demonstrably knows this topic well? So I think there's a couple things that are going to be happening here. Expert or enthusiast who knows the topic well. I believe that Google is looking for certain phrases and it's looking for certain things that are mentioned in this article. Okay, so if I believe that Google is looking for certain phrases or certain words or certain topics that come up when you talk about certain things. And again, Google is a machine and it doesn't understand every single topic and what's an expert and what's not an expert in the world. But what Google does have, it has an index of all the pages that it's ever crawled, and it can kind of, separate them all into here's all the pages that talk about this subject, and the vast majority of them mention certain phrases or certain things, or they answer certain questions, and or they touch on certain subtopics within this particular thing that they're talking about. I believe that that is what this is. Um, you're showing some sort of evidence that you know what you're talking about. So I think part of it is just hitting some of the similar things that Google is expecting to see based on the pattern of other pages that it's encountered in the past talking about similar topics. That's what I believe. Okay. Is the content free from easily verified factual errors? Okay, so flat earthers, sorry, you're going to lose on this. But Google does not want to promote things that are widely known. Um, it doesn't want to show results of things that are disinformation, misinformation, misspoken things, unfactual, untrue evidence. Now, the sites that are this is going to be held to the highest standard with are the your money or your life sites, which would be health, finance, insurance, nutrition. Maybe you're buying a car, maybe you're buying a home. Um, anything that's going to affect your long-term well-being. This is going to be held to the highest possible standard. So if you're a health site or you're a finance site, if you're giving advice that is not the consensus of the majority of the rest of your field, you might, not rank as well. If you're a scientific site or you're an engineering site and you're saying things which are not, the consensus of the other websites out there or the agreed upon information, then you might get hit. That's what I believe that this is. Okay. So would you feel comfortable trusting this content for issues related to money or your life? This is the same thing that we just talked about. I think it's self-explanatory. I think part of this too, and it doesn't explicitly say this, but there's two things that call into this. Now, one is user experience and design. If the site looks like garbage, then you're probably not going to trust it. You're not going to trust this website. Do you feel comfortable trusting this content? If this site looks like it was built in the 1980s or the 90s, that's probably not going to make you feel that comfortable. The other thing with this too is the brand, especially with things like health. That's really over the last year, there's certain brands that are getting pushed that Google says we trust these websites because they've been around a long time, and the user engagement metrics that we get say that people trust these enough, so we're going to push these. Finance might be the same thing. Uh, you know, any your money or your life type of a vertical, there's brands that are getting pushed. Now, this is not a new thing. This is something that they set about to do way long ago, and they talked about it in 2008. Remember, brands aren't the problem. They're the solution. They're how you sort out the cesspool. That was a quote in 2008 from the then CEO of Google, Eric Schmidt. We have all the big name sites over here and then all the little tiny sites over here. It's about credibility. So especially with your money or your life sites, this is a long-term battle. Okay. Brand is part of it for sure. It's not just content. Presentation and production questions. Is the content free from spelling or stylistic issues? I think that's pretty straightforward. They don't want to see misspelling. They don't want to see broken English or broken whatever the language is. If it's not written in the natural syntax of that language, or if it has spelling errors, or if it just sounds weird in the native language, whatever it's written in, then it's probably not going to rank as high. Because also too, people are going to show that by scrolling through quickly or bouncing out quickly or not scrolling as deep or going back and looking for something else. Okay, was the content produced well, or does it appear sloppy and hastily produced? So that there's some overlap there, but this could be uh, maybe you didn't research stuff that deep. Maybe you didn't research the topic. Maybe you just wrote some words down without actually thinking about the question that you're trying to answer. Maybe you hired somebody uh, on Fiverr to produce your content. That could be what's going on there. Is the content mass produced or outsourced to a large number of creators or spread across a large network of sites so that individual pages or sites don't get as much attention or care? So there's a couple things here that's talking about mass produced or outsourced to a large number of creators. I believe that this has some overlap with the syntax, the sloppiness that they talk about, hastily produced. But the spread across a large network of sites, I think that has to do with content syndication. And I think there's a lot of SEO firms out there on the lower end of the market that are using techniques from a long time ago, like 10 years ago, where they're submitting articles to all types of places that take articles. And there's not a lot of hoops to jump through. You just basically give them an article and they publish it. And so this content is getting syndicated on a bunch of low quality, low barrier to entry sites. That could be a signal that maybe that content that's linking to you is not that great. Maybe if you have said content like that on your site, maybe you're an article farm. Maybe you're taking um, articles for money and they're not well written and you're just getting the payday and cashing the checks. Something that I heard recently too, and I can't remember who said it, but basically, if you're checked out from producing your own content and you're accepting a lot of guest posts and they're not the same quality as your original content, that could devalue your site after a while. Okay. Does the content have an excessive amount of ads that distract from or interfere with the main content? Now, something that I do know for a fact is because Matt Cutts, who used to head up the web spam team at Google, used to talk about this, but there's a ratio of screen size that you don't want to have like more screen, what do you call it, real estate. You don't want to have more of the screen taken up by ads than you do the main content. That is a bad sign. There's a way to do ads tastefully, and there's a way to do it tacky and annoying to where there's pop-ups everywhere and there's ads overlaid on top of ads, and it's just annoying. That is not good user experience. So I do believe that Google has some sort of ratio calculation in their algorithm for determining how much of this screen is actually being overlapped with ads. And if it exceeds a certain threshold, and I don't know what that threshold is, but uh, I believe that probably devalues sites. Okay. Does the content display well for mobile devices when viewed on them? Now, this is something that goes back way back to 2014. They started telling people Mobilegeddon, get your sites mobile friendly, and they've been saying this for like 5 years. Um, and even when I was building my very first websites in 2010, mobile friendly, responsive design was a thing. And it's been almost a decade since that. So if you're not mobile friendly now, Google does not care because you don't care. And, they talked about that with the mobile first index. That was, about a year and a half ago. And basically, everything is mobile first. There's more people accessing the web on mobile than there are on desktop. So if you don't care about mobile friendliness, Google doesn't care about your site. Okay, comparative questions. Does the content provide substantial value when compared to other pages and search results? Now, something that I believe that this is, it was also talking about uh, answering questions substantial, the expertise on the topic. What I believe is there's a certain threshold for pages that rank well um, in any search query. Now, for some search queries, maybe there's not a lot of good pages, so maybe the threshold is really low. If you're in marketing and you practice the skyscraper technique, probably the threshold is really high. But what I think that this has to do with is, are you going deep on the topic on this page that you're trying to get to rank for this certain query? And substantial value, I think, is a way that you could probably measure it is compared to the other pages out there that you're trying to outrank. Do you answer more questions in that subtopic of that um, query that you're trying to answer? Do you answer more subtopics? That could lead to more rich snippets. That could lead to more of those people also ask little accordion boxes that appear in the search engine results pages. A lot of people will point to the studies that say that a larger word count pages seem to rank better. And I think that's a correlation to this providing substantial value, going deeper on a topic. I don't know that it's just because of the word count, but I think it's more about you're going deeper on the topic compared to the competitors. Okay, and the last one in this, does the content seem to be serving the genuine interests of visitors to the site? Or does it seem to exist solely by someone attempting to guess what might rank well in search engines? Now, there's a video we did just a few days ago, and it talked about focusing on a single topic or subject and becoming an expert on that topic with your website. And I do believe that Google looks at the entirety, the catalog of the content on your site, and tries to determine what is the main overarching topic of this site. What is the main thread that's tying this entire site together? Now, if you have a website and it's just a bunch of articles, and some of them are on home and garden, and some of them are on lifestyle, some of them are on food, and some of them are on home improvement, then Google doesn't know what bucket to put you into, doesn't know what overarching category to put your site into. Uh, and it might look at that as like you're just writing a bunch of content to see what ranks. So what I believe that this is talking about is audience cultivation and going deep on one topic and becoming a subject matter expert over time, over the long haul on your website. Now, this is not something that you're going to achieve in 3 months or 6 months or even a year, but you really have to build up a library and a track record of answering the queries with your content, or letting people get to what they need on your website. I believe that that is really what this is talking about. Now, this also talks about, look at what pages dropped. What pages were most impacted if you're looking at this article right now? And, maybe compare those to the pages that are doing well. Maybe there's something missing or something that you could improve on your pages, and look at it objectively uh, with fresh eyes. Okay, so then it goes into talking about the quality rater guidelines, the EAT, the expertise, authority, trustworthiness. Now, this is something that existed in the Google quality rater guidelines since about 2015 or 2016. And the human quality raters are they are human beings that look at the search results, and then they look at what's ranking, and they evaluate the pages, and they have a checklist of things, and they're supposed to grade different parts of the page. And the whole goal is they give that feedback to the Google engineers, and then the Google engineers say either the algorithm is moving closer to thinking like a human and making the same choices that a human would make, or it's not. And so we got to make adjustments. That's really what this is about. But the EAT, we talked about it a little bit. It says search raters have no control over how the pages rank. They just give feedback to the engineers, and then they dial in the algorithm a little bit tighter. That's all that is. Okay. Um, and they talk about eat again right here. A lot of people are going to talk to this. And again, everybody that I talk to that does SEO seems to have a different definition of expertise, authoritativeness, and trustworthiness. Because you will notice in this article, Google did not out and out say this equals expertise, this equals authoritativeness, and this is trustworthiness. It was really, really ambiguous, all of it. So that's why you have so many people that are confused about this. Um, but I give you my thoughts on it. Google also links to some people, some SEOs. It says here are a few articles written by third parties who share how they've used these guidelines as advice to follow. Now, they don't say they were right or they were wrong. They just say here's third parties who share how they've used the guidelines as advice. And that's it. They're not really saying like this is right or wrong. They're just saying, check these out. Maybe there's some clues hidden in here that you should look at. But it also says links to these articles are not endorsements of any particular SEO companies or services. We just found these articles themselves to be helpful content. So maybe they're giving you ideas of what they consider high quality content on this particular topic. That might be a clue. Okay. Other questions here, they say broad core updates tend to happen every few months. Recovery might not be until the next broad core update, so it's maybe 3 or 4 months. And they say that they do smaller core updates. That's daily. That's no big deal. But improvements don't mean that you're going to get all your spots back and you're going to get back to your ranking spot. Because again, there might be other sites that have made improvements and they're just simply better than you now. And pages do not have any guaranteed position or static position. It's not a title belt where you have to get pinned or KO'd or tap out to lose that number 1 ranking. If there's more deserving content, that will rank well. And lastly, they reiterate here too, like the search engines do not understand content the way human beings do. This is something that I've been saying. I want you to focus on this. We look for signals we can gather about content and understand the correlations. Okay, so machine learning is not a human being. We talked about this in the Google Paradox video as well. A lot of people do misunderstand that. Okay. Like I said, they're always trying to improve. This is just my take on this article. And like I said, Google representatives and Google itself is not going to give you 100% of the secret sauce that goes into the algorithm. They're not going to tell you exactly how to rank. So you really need to make your own judgments about what's going on here. You need to make your own assessments and really, analyze it. Not attached to your own website, but analyze it from an objective point of view. Hope that makes sense. My name's John Locke. My business is Lockdown Design and SEO. I'm here every single day making videos on SEO. I want to thank all the new subscribers that have come on in the last few months. I really appreciate it. If you have a question, leave it in the comments below. Be happy to answer it for you. I'll be here tomorrow as well. Hey, thanks for tuning in, and until next time, peace.